And we have been joined in studio by the French Ambassador to Ghana, Francois Hollande. Forgive me, Francois Pujolas. Yes, I think the president's name stuck in my head. Monsieur Francois Pujolas is the French ambassador to Ghana, and we're going to be touching on a number of issues from security and then also Ghana-France relations, and also going forward, what are some of the key sectors in the country that they might want to, show some interest in. We are talking about tourism, education, and the like. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Martin. Thank you.
Yes. And to start with, let's start with issues of security, because in the last few months, I think it's been quite dominant in public discussion, not only on international media, but even here in Ghana. France was attacked a few months back, and that led to the loss of some 129 lives, and several others were injured. How did that attack on France change France's policy with regard to security?
Well, you touch upon a very important issue, Martin, and you're right in saying that this attack on France end of last year was a real tragedy, and of course, France, unfortunately, had been targeted before, so it was not, if I may say, a first, but by the scope of the attack and its consequences in terms of victims, as you mentioned, it was really a tragedy and a very important one. So the French authorities, of course, took action after this attack in terms of reinforcing security in order to assure safety of the people living in France and coming to France. Lots of police forces, additional police forces have been deployed. More efforts have been given to intelligence and information sharing, including international cooperation. And actually it has proved efficient in terms of, that some of the suspects of the attacks, and if not all, have been arrested. And networks are about to be dismantled, but we know it's just a step and the threat remains. So we are all vigilant. And again, France has reacted, but France is not alone. It's unfortunately a global issue. Yeah. Terrorism is a global issue. There is a global threat. So we must act more than ever.
Would you say it has changed the lifestyle of the average French national or the residents in France? Has it changed their lifestyle in any way, the attacks?
It hasn't changed, and it must not, actually. Of course, we know, and not only French people for that matter, but all countries should know, and their citizens, that we have to be maybe more vigilant and more cautious, but it doesn't mean that it should affect our way of life, because that would mean that terrorists have won, and they shouldn't. So no, it hasn't changed, but of course people are very much more attentive and much more cautious in terms of security, that's for sure. And
what role would you say your citizens are playing in ensuring that there is not a recurrence of these kinds of attacks? You know that the government has heightened security, lots of policemen, like you mentioned, the security are on a lot more alert. What role would you say the citizens themselves have to play to ensure that there isn't a recurrence of that?
Well, to make sure that, to make the utmost to prevent any further attacks, but we know that unfortunately there may be new attacks coming, but to try to avoid any attacks, it's mainly the job of the police and security forces, the intelligence services. But of course the citizen has their part to play in terms of complying, accepting to bear all the implementation of necessary safety and security measures to be checked, accepting to be checked at the entrance of museum or malls or airport, whatever. And that is a sense of responsibility that we expect from our citizens, not only in France but in Ghana too.
Exactly. Okay, now let's look at it in a global way with specific reference to Europe. We know that France has a few countries, bordering you, and has this attack on France, or no, we know like a place like Spain and the other countries which are quite closer to France may not have recorded that kind of impact of the attack. What would you say France's contribution is to these other countries, or those countries' contribution is to France in ensuring that the whole of that European enclave is safe?
Well, let me tell you, actually two points to answer these questions. First of all, you know, when these attacks took place on Paris, even beyond Europe, we saw the reaction, including in Ghana, and we appreciated, by the way, the support of the Ghanaian people and the Ghanaian authorities. But speaking of Europe, other European countries have been targeted. Unfortunately, terrorism has been here for 10, 20 years, that form of terrorism. So we are used to cooperate with each other, and we know that each and every country of Europe basically has been targeted and could be in the future. Wow. So there is a strong solidarity between us and collective action. Okay.
Now, I would look at how, like you mentioned, all these other countries are targets of a sort. But a few years back, when issues of terror started, we heard about the United States and its closest ally, that is Britain, and then now France, and we're told about other countries. It's even shifted to Africa. We're going to Studio A for news. When we return, we'll look at how this has also affected Africa and whether you think there is a link between the attack on the Francophone countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, whether there is a linkage between your colonial countries and then also yourself. We go straight to Studio A, where Michael Ado is standing by to let us know what's happening in the world of news. Good morning.
A very good morning and welcome to our first news package on New Day. My name is Michael Ado. Now, welcome back. My name is Michael Ado. Now, in a build-up to this year's election, a youth activist of the New Patriotic Party in the Bnohafu region, Kwame Bafo, has filed a motion at the Supreme Court to stop the limited voter registration exercise slated for April 28, 2016. Hearing on the motion is scheduled for April 6, 2016. Now, the plaintiff in the injunction prayed the court not to allow the limited registration by the EC to go on until the final determination by the court. Kwame Bafo says the current register is fraught with names of foreigners, minors, deceased persons, as well as names of persons who are constitutionally ineligible to vote in the general elections. According to him, the register contains names of persons who have not established qualification to register and whose registration were founded on proof of qualification with the National Health Insurance Card. Now, founder of the African Reform Movement, Dr. Ni Amu-Darko, says the Electoral Commission is behind time in its preparations for the November polls. He argued the Commission's timing of the limited registration exercise and lack of sensitization ahead of the general elections is a major source of worry.
Some civil society organizations and political parties have cautioned the Commission's ability to fully implement recommendations of the Justice VRAC CRAP Committee a few months to the elections. Again, issues about low voter education and how the limited voter registration will be conducted have dominated media discourse. Briefing the media on the capacity of the Electoral Commission to organize a free and fair elections this year, founder of African Reform Movement, Dr. Ni Amu-Darko, said the Commission is ill-prepared.
The Electoral Commission says that they are going to do auditing of the register. We don't know the modalities, and we don't know when that will start. The limited registration has been postponed twice. From February, now we are going to end of April. Certain that will impact on the rest of the activities to follow.
Dr. Ni Amo Daku again argued the 826.8 million cedis approved by Parliament to be used by the Electoral Commission for this year's polls is too high.
The Electoral Commission has presented a grossly overinflated budget to Parliament. 350 million for 40 million people on our electoral roll is totally unacceptable.
The African Reform Movement wants some reforms in the structure and the composition of the Electoral Commission to ensure credible elections in the country.
And still on politics, some opposition political parties and pressure groups have served notice to demonstrate on April 6th against the Electoral Commission. The demonstration is intended to compel the EC to create a new voters register ahead of the November polls.
The planned demonstration is dubbed Bamuyada, which means we shall not agree in the Hausa language. A press conference in Kumasi was attended by representatives of the NPP, IPP and UPP, as well as members of the Let My Vote Count Alliance and the Alliance for Accountable Governance, AFAC. Speakers accused the Electoral Commission of bias and calls for a new voters register. Ashanti Regional NPP Chairman Bernard Entry Besiako says next Wednesday's demonstration is against the EC's failure to implement proposals on the validation of the voters register. NPP parliamentary candidate for Asawase, Alhaji Aledu Seidu, says the demonstration is an action to save Ghana. The convener of Let My Vote Count Alliance, David Asante, called the Electoral Commission to clean up the register through validation.
The EC is now going back to tell us validation is not the way to go. Exhibition is the way to go. Look at where the EC took us from. From one stage to the other, set up committee recommendation. I've accepted it, I'll work with it. Now the EC says I will not work with it. For the information of Ghanaians who love peace, the EC cannot continue to be a lord unto us.
And finally, Dr. Zenato Rawlings has filed a motion to invoke the supervisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Her counsel, Godwin Kujo Tamaklo, filed the application on her behalf. They have prayed for an order of certiorari to bring up the ruling of His Lordship Kweku T. Akabuafo J. of the High Court General Jurisdiction, dated 22nd March 2016. It wants the judgment to be quashed for wrongfully assuming jurisdiction to interpret and define the scope of application of Article 94, Clause 1A of the Constitution. The order seeks to restrain the judge, Kweku T. Akabuafo J., from proceeding to hear the dispute between the applicant and the interested parties pending a decision in the instant application.
All right, thank you very much, Michael Addo, with the updates in the world of news. We're back in Studio B, where we have the France Ambassador to Ghana, Francois Pujolas, joining us in studio to talk about France. And then also later on, we'll be looking at France-Ghana relations, issues surrounding France and the other European countries, specifically on issues of security. And before we went on the break, you had outlined what France is doing to prevent a recurrence of the attacks. And then also you talked about the role France is playing in partnership with the other countries surrounding it to ensure that at least that regional enclave is safer than it used to be a few years back. When you talk about terror threats and terror attacks, about 5, 7, 10 years ago, it was heard that it was America, the United States of America, that came to mind, and then their closest ally, that was Britain, and now France. What do you think drew the attention of these terrorists to start focusing on other countries, and in this case France?
As I said, terrorism has become a global issue, and global issue means basically every country can become a target now. You mentioned terrorist attacks in Europe, France, Belgium lately, but they were not the only targets in Europe. You could speak of Pakistan lately, Easter weekend, or even Turkey several times lately, etc. And not to mention some attacks which took place in West Africa.
Right.
So it's a global issue. It's not particularly the US or France, but you have to take it as a global issue and terrorism as a global threat on democracies in the world.
What's the relationship between France and Belgium like?
Well, France and Belgium are, very close friends, and for obvious historical and cultural reasons. And you have lots of Belgian citizens in France and vice versa, and we have been enjoying very close cooperation and close relation for years, if not centuries.
Until recent. But were you surprised that the persons who were arrested in relation to the France attacks were said to be people who came in from Belgium, and that the arrests were even on Belgium soil?
There is something that Europeans are used to for years now. We live in France, for French people living in France, but we know we live in Europe. Europe, you mentioned, you used the word, which I don't like so much, enclave.
Okay.
Europe doesn't see itself as an enclave. It's actually the most open region in the world in terms of trade, investment, and also, even if we are facing a crisis in terms of migrants, but if you see the number of foreigners from other continents coming to Europe, it's huge actually. So Europe sees itself and wants to keep that way, its own identity as an open space for the rest of the world in all senses of the term. And within Europe, of course, we have developed stronger cooperation between countries because we know and we want it to happen that we share the same destiny.
Right.
So it's not only because of historical or cultural reasons, it's really a political choice of all the European countries. So that means that we have to face together both opportunities sometimes for economic growth or progress, but also challenges, like in that case security challenges.
Yeah. All right, let's shift the attention now to Africa, where in the last few months Mali has been attacked, Cote d'Ivoire has been attacked, Burkina Faso also recently. Is there any link, you think, that these countries are also under attack? Is there any link at all between them and France, for which reason you think that these terror guys have targeted them?
It's a very complex situation, and it would be rather difficult and not necessarily reflecting the truth to shift to a swift conclusion, because France, for instance, intervened in Mali. I can come to that to remind of some facts in the details that there was these reactions. We don't know always in details what are the real motivations of those groups attacking countries. In the case of France, because it has been mentioned in some of the messages sent by the terrorist groups after some attacks, so we cannot ignore that it must have played some role. I'd like to take the opportunity to remind that 2013, Mali was about to collapse, at least, groups jihadist group coming from the north of Mali were about to seize power in Bamako. And what would have happened if France, backed by the United Nations resolution and responding to a call for help of the, at that time, Malian authorities, had not come to help. Now we are in a different situation. Stabilization is there in Mali. Of course, there are still problems, but there is a political solution, and that that all parties there have to implement. But terrorism is still there, and there is a cooperation between Sahel countries in particular, and France is very supportive of that, including militarily, but not only militarily. The pillars of our actions are also to maintain, emergency humanitarian help, to help economic and social revival also
Right.
in those countries affected by, you know, those problems, and moreover to maintain democratic progress, to maintain the rule of law, and to maintain the capabilities of the concerned states and administrations to
So
do
it
their
would
job.
be entirely wrong for those who are saying that the attack on these countries was as a result of France's intervention when they had their own crisis.
You know, when you look at situation, you have to look at the global picture. What is a global picture? You have some groups, obviously, which wants to destabilize the region and countries in the region. And countries of the region can count on their allies and friends to support them and prevent that to happen.
Okay.
I mean, that is obvious in the case of Mali, and it could be the case for other countries.
Okay. And as it stands now, do you still have men on the ground in these countries and helping them reform the country and get onto the right steps?
As I said, France is still present there. There are, you know, bilateral agreements with those countries.
Okay.
And now we are there in the framework of the Operation Barkhane, involving the 5 states of the Sahelian region. But France is not alone. You have also United Nations forces there in Mali in particular.
Okay. Now let's come to Ghana. We have not recorded any, and we pray we do not record any of some of these attacks. You have been in Ghana a few months and studied. You've also heard the news making rounds that, at least, like you mentioned, it is a global issue and every country is a target. As we speak, we haven't picked up any signals yet that we are going to be recording any such thing. What would your advice be to not only the security and government, but to Ghanaians in general with regard to being cautious in these times, these scary times, as some people will put it?
The National Security Council of Ghana met a few days after the attacks in Grand Bassam, Côte d'Ivoire. And I fully support the official statement that was made afterwards. First of all, saying that there is a credible, this was the word used, credible threat to all countries in the sub-region West Africa. So that is the case, and that is what was stated by the Ghanaian authorities after the meeting of the National Security Council.
Right.
Regarding the population, because this is one point you mentioned earlier regarding France, I mean, I fully subscribe, I mean, I fully share what was said also in the same statement, namely to ask to the people to be responsible, to be more cautious, and maybe also more curious, and to report any suspect activities, and to accept also controls and measures that will be taken for the sake of the safety and security of the population.
We know that anytime there are these red alerts, embassies and high commissions give information to their residents or their citizens who are resident in the country. In the face of that, what are some of the do's and don'ts that you tell them that we as citizens who are already in the country can also learn from?
Well, what you say is true. This is a general procedure for all embassies, actually. And, well, in the case of Ghana, it's very transparent, actually. What we say, actually, there are messages we send to our community, and there are messages that are on the internet site of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs for visitors or travelers to the country. And what the advice today is exactly in the same line of the official statement I mentioned earlier of the Ghanaian authorities. So we have exactly the same analysis of the situation.
Okay, so there are clear do's and don'ts that we, so this can be easily accessed on your website?
Absolutely. And that regards visitors coming to Ghana. And again, what we say is exactly, more or less, not with exactly the same words, but what was stated in the press release of the NSC.
Do you give these alerts and cautions to your citizens when you get information from Ghanaian authorities, or when maybe France sends you information that based on A, B, and C intelligence we've picked, I think that you need to give this information to our residents. Is it what you get from them or what our authorities give you?
Well, first of all, words are very important. So I wouldn't say alert, because if you say alert, at least for French ears, it means, imminent danger. So the message we sent regarding Ghana was not alert in terms of imminent danger. It was more in the line of what the NSC stated in his official statement the other day. As per, the reasons that lead us to decide of that or this message. Of course, I won't go into the details, but I can tell you that it's not necessarily exactly based only on information coming from Ghanaian sources, but also our own proper sources. And it has to take into account not only what's happening in Ghana, situation in Ghana, but the overall situation in the world and in the sub-region as well.
Okay. All right. I think security issues cannot be overemphasized. It's of importance to every individual and every country. So we have dealt with it extensively, and we hope that we continue to stay in safety as the years roll on. Let's now focus on Ghana's upcoming elections. You have been in the country a few months now. You've seen the political climate. What do you make of it? Ghana's getting ready for a major election, how the country is, coming up. What are your readings of Ghana's temperature, political temperature?
Well, thank you, Martin, for that question, but you don't expect me as a diplomat, of course, to comment on the inner political situation of Ghana, which I won't do, and I would only say, and really this is very important, being here for some months already, we appreciate very much the quality and maturity of the Ghanaian democracy. And really, these are not only words. You would say that in some other parts of the world. It wouldn't come as something that you have to stress in particular. But here in Ghana, I guess not only France, but all partners of Ghana, outside of Africa in particular, they value very much this maturity of the Ghanaian people and democracy. And as per the coming election, my message would be, of course, and it's not original, but it's important, peaceful election. That's because it's a start. If you don't have peaceful elections, well, it's difficult to build on democratic process afterwards. So peaceful elections are the key, and I'm very much confident. Of course, I know there will be tensions also in France. Before elections, it's sometimes a little bit hectic. I was actually going to ask you, but really, I'm sure these will be peaceful elections, and we all support all efforts in that direction, which, by the way, don't involve only the authorities or the present authorities of Ghana, but every part of the societies, all stakeholders have to take their own responsibilities in this. Before you came to Ghana, I'm sure you had heard and monitored our elections in the last few years, and then specifically 2012 when by just a slim margin we had to take it to court and all of that, and comparing that to an advanced democracy like France, which even up to now, whenever you're going into elections, there are heated debates, there are discussions, there are exit polls and all of that. What do you think are some of the lessons we can draw from advanced democracies with regard to elections? Well, I'm not comfortable with the concept of advanced democracies because I see lots of, I won't comment on the internal political situation of France either. Okay. But, there is no lessons to be learned or taken. Each people and society must find its own way, and I think that Ghana, more than 25 years or almost 25 years after, with a new constitution and already a 6th or 7th election, has shown enough of maturity. And if there are improvements to be made, they will come from Ghana and from Ghanaian people as themselves. Wonderful. All right.
So now I'm quite excited about those comments. Now let's look at trade. Ghana-France relations have been on for several years, and we are told that it can only get better as the years roll on. But with last year, the trade relation between Ghana saw some level of a decline. We're told that Ghana and France bilateral trade declined drastically in 2015, recording $650 million in export earnings and $270 million in import. Now, the proceeds are just about half of the level of bilateral trade earnings recorded in 2013. And in 2013, we're talking about 1.5 billion for exports and then about 1.2 billion for imports. And you have been in for just a few months, but do you think that the right steps are being put in place? First of all, what is your take on the fact that Ghana and France relations seem to be growing stronger and there are more steps with, recently we have some investors from Bordeaux coming into the country to ascertain the probable areas they would want to invest in?
First of all, let me tell you that in our view, the partnership between Ghana and France should be mutually supportive and mutually rewarding. So it's not a question of what we can take from Ghana or Ghana can take from France, but what we can do together. And these are not only words, and that only means that we should have a long-term approach to our partnership. We think that Ghana has a crucial strategic role to play in West Africa, being the first GDP in West Africa after Nigeria, and having, for obvious reasons, the capacity and maybe the need also to push towards more integration, not only for economic reasons, but also for political stability in the West African region. Speaking of the bilateral relations, and in particular in the economic field, well, I'm not quite sure about the figures you mentioned, but you're right that there has been a decline in the past few years. So now the total trade, I mean both imports and exports, is about a little bit more than 1 billion euros, equivalent to $1 billion now, with in favor, about 100 million euros in favor of Ghana. What we think is that for the sake of our bilateral partnership, we should do more. Actually, the market share in terms of within the total imports in Ghana, from Ghana, is about 3%. So it's not enough. We think that France has lots more to offer in terms of cooperation. And let me mention just few examples of sectors where we are developing, and we would like to see more partnerships taking place between our two countries. The first one being public-private partnerships in the fields of energy, transport, water management and sanitation, as well as waste management, all related in particular to the management of sustainable cities, the cities of tomorrow that we want to see in Africa in particular. And in that field, France and French companies have very interesting records in the model of the PPP in particular. So we'll organize next September in Accra a big event. The theme of the sustainable city. We will bring major companies, but also SMEs, because major companies and groups, they can come and go where they want, but SMEs, they need some support, especially in France. And we'll have them in Accra to present their solutions for a more sustainable city in the different fields I mentioned. And we will have also innovative solutions to present to the Ghanaian public and companies, private sector.
Okay, so in conclusion, what would you say what's the latest with regard to the Bordeaux delegation that came to Ghana? What's the latest with regard to that decision to come to Ghana?
Well, as you know, because I remember that you invited us to present this delegation and what was at stake. So I can tell you that the feedback was very much positive. They will come back, especially in a few fields, and this year, in the field of IT. They have had some very positive, interesting contacts here in Ghana, but also in the agro-food business and energy. And also something I would like to stress, because beyond the economy, as I said, what we want is long-term partnership. And long-term partnership, that means education, training the workforce, and developing job opportunities. So speaking of Bordeaux, we would like very much with them to put in place cooperation in the field of training for in the hospitality management sector. Because we think that Ghana has lots of potential in terms of tourism, but maybe need some support in terms of developing the proper training for the workforce to work in those hotels and other hospitality institutions in the country. That will develop for sure in the future. So this is one concrete examples where we know of French institutions in that field that are interested in coming to Ghana and developing some partnership for that objective.
Particular objective, okay. All right, unfortunately, we have run out of time on this, but we are grateful to have had you to let us know what we as a nation can do, and then what France is also doing in support of Ghana with regard to trade. We've been speaking with the France ambassador to Ghana, Monsieur Francois Pujolas, and it's been quite insightful. Merci beaucoup. And
Merci.
yes,
Merci à vous.
yes, have a good day. All right, so this is NewDay. There is more to come.